I'm joined today by Laure Jackson, as ever, our sensory specialist, who's also an occupational therapist specializing in that area. Hello, Anne.
Hello, it's good to see you.
I like to do this every so often, but what's an occupational therapist, and then what's sensory health within occupational health?
Within occupational therapy,
Mm.
yeah, a very good question. So, occupational therapy, in and of itself, we work with everybody who is human and we help them to do the job of living. So, whatever it is, so it's really vast, it's really varied. So, we can be working with people with maybe some physical disabilities, or it could be mental health issues, or it could be older people, or it could be children. We could be working outdoors, indoors, in clinics, in hospitals, in schools, in outdoor adventure centres, working online, which is my area mainly. So we can go into anywhere and do anything. But the skills that we've been taught are that we dissect what it is to be human. You know, we've learned physically what's going on, emotionally, psychologically, all the aspects that make us who we are. And then I have focused in postgraduate training in the senses and understanding how sensory processing and integration affects our sensory health. So that's why I termed my other name as a sensory health coach, and even sensory health, because it really wasn't about 5 years ago. There was hardly anybody talking about sensory health. And I just really felt as though, no, this is really important. This is just as important as our physical, mental, spiritual, all the other areas of our health and well-being. The senses are almost foundational to that. So
I think because we've touched on this many times, but I think a lot of people think sensory health. Oh, that's a thing for children at school who can't concentrate, which may be a massively oversimplified one part of what you do. But just give us a couple of examples. One with somebody in school, and one with somebody, say, in their 50s and 60s, where sensory health is an issue, and the bit where you step in.
yeah, okay. Well, let's go with the school one, which is very real and prominent at the moment. School avoidance. Okay, that's big. There are many people who are just disruptive, but you get to the point where some individuals actually will refuse to go at all kinds of ages and stages, from the littlies through to the teens. So that's quite a significant one because of the overwhelm that there is in that environment. But also, if you get them there, they can then be aggressive. So I deal with people who the other children are avoiding them because they don't like being around them. They're scared they might get hit. They might get the teachers are too. So that is more on the extreme. I mean, we can just deal with disruption, lack of concentration, a little bit clumsy. They're classic. They're really lovely, really easy to work with actually, and to make those changes. We really need to get serious about looking at the sensory environment and looking at how they are processing sensory information when we've got to the point of school avoidant and hurtful, not intending to be, but just they need to be because of what their bodies are going through. So that's a kind of a schoolish one. That's a younger person one, because you can apply that to a club or struggling with meeting other family members. Some of the adults, that's more the lack of focus, the inability to follow what's going on in a team meeting, highly distractible, really don't like the socials that go on at work. They may be more withdrawn. Obviously, this is just one type of sensory processing, but those are typical issues because people don't like the sights and the sounds and the smells. They don't want to be touched unexpectedly. There are much more overreactive adults who may or may not be autistic, but they just may have just overreactive sensory processing.
I see. I think back at education when you think about I don't know, left and right-handed people who write with the right or with the left. Now you go back far enough in time, and nobody was allowed to write with your left. That was terrible. You were horrid. You were useless and rubbish if you couldn't hold your pen with your right hand. And then over time, mercifully, we realised in education, do you know what? Some people, they can't actually write with their right hand, and that's okay. And rather saying this is the only standard, you must write with your right hand, schools then realize quite quickly, actually, there are people who literally can't do that. And we can shout and we can holler and we can get as aggressive as we like. It
Mm.
doesn't change the fact that they're left-handed, not right-handed. So that's something that we've seen that's much more of a, I guess, is that physiological rather than physical? If they've got two hands, it's not physical, is it? But then we've got the sensory health element where people are realizing and quite they'll state I'm ADHD, I'm neurodivergent, I'm this, I'm that, and they're using terms which, to be honest, I'm having chatted to you for 2 years, I'm still getting my head around. But the bit where I think we need the you part of the equation is when somebody doesn't want to go to a social at work. For example, I never went to them. I hated them. And it wasn't because I don't like people. I work on radio. I love going to festivals and being surrounded by thousands of people. I just didn't like socializing with work. However, the subtlety, which is where you come in, it's not somebody who just doesn't want to do that because they'd rather be at home with their family. This is somebody who can't process a social situation. It's the same outcome, not attending something. The reason why is utterly different, and
Yes.
that's the part where we need you.
That is the crucial part of anything. And all the work that I'm doing at the moment is trying to let people know that there is a sensory code. We have to go beyond the sensory basics. We have to go beyond looking at what behavior presents like, because the root of that behavior, exactly what you're saying, is the difference between really making a difference for that person's life who wants to be there, but actually just can't because it's too overwhelming, other than just someone like you, actually, I just don't really want to. I'd rather do other things. And like, goodness me, that's exactly what life should be. You go to things and you don't go to things. That's just normal. But it's when you can't do things that you really want to do, that's when I would really love the word to get out. Let's assess, let's get these sensory needs looked at properly, and then we can join the dots up properly. That's the other thing.
Of course, if the outward, or rather the final conclusion is not attending a Christmas party with your work, if you feel like you should, then that's guilt being placed on you. Now you're under pressure. And you feel that whether you can go or not. Now, I'm quite happy in a massive room of people. I love it, actually. But I just didn't ever want to do it for work because you know what? I'm not paid to be here. The only reason I know these people is I'm paid to know them. So don't care to meet them outside of work. It's just the way it was. Joe was always the same. Very rarely we might think, oh, we'd better go to something, I suppose. But that's the difference. Although the conclusion is the same, not attending, it's I don't want to go, as opposed to I am unable to go. Because if I go to that, I'm going to be really on edge. I'm going to be so overreactive. I'm probably going to get aggressive or violent. So I won't go. But there is actually hope, even in that scenario. Just like the children who are avoiding school, we can force a child to go to school. We can literally physically pick them up, plonk them in a school. You are now in school, tough. I mean, that's great, but it's not necessarily the greatest outcome because one, they're going to probably try and find a way to get out. Two, they're not going to engage. And three, violence is actually quite possible, but we can hone into the violence or the aggression or the physical outburst without recognizing, there's a reason for that. And they're not just in a bad mood. They literally can't cope.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the way that we handle that, just writing an article for your magazine, actually, just about that at the moment. It's about those the how we can really make things worse when we don't understand this, and you can compound something that could be easily dealt with in 5 minutes, and it just gets compounded, and it spoils everybody's day. It can last for hours. The result of not handling, not understanding, not getting to the root cause of a behavior properly.
Which is really hard because if you've got an aggression outburst, I mean, the classic one for an adult, perhaps somebody who's served in Afghanistan or Iraq and they've got PTSD, they've got a trauma emotionally, mentally, not necessarily, obviously, physically. And then they have these reactions. Oh, well, they're violent and they're aggressive and, oh, it's domestic violence. Well, actually, no, it may be even domestic violence. It might be that in a home, but it may not be domestic violence in the right setting, because if they're reacting to emotional pain, it's like saying to somebody who's lost a leg, why aren't you walking properly? And we need to be much more aware of the scenarios and settings that people have been through. It's that thing of walking in their shoes, isn't it? But when we're talking about outbursts of aggression, it may not be violent tendencies. That's bad. That needs to be dealt with. Yes, call the police and sort that. It might actually be needing to have that anyway, but actually it's because they can't pick up a piece of paper or they've got an internal trauma and they can't cope with you touching them because all they can remember is somebody abusingly touching their arm, and all of a sudden that triggers them. And but again, that's why I keep coming back to that. That's why we need people like you can recognize, and you talk about these patterns, these
Mm.
clusters, because it's not just an outburst; it's an outburst after another outburst, but always in a context. Okay, that only happens in a context. Now we're getting some context. Now we can find maybe there's a pattern and maybe there's something else going on.
And then looking at clusters within each of the senses, because each of us have, we might not like the sun if it's too bright, and that's like a one-off. But if you get like one, that they definitely need their sunglasses all the time, the blinds are always down. They wear very plain clothes. Their house is really not cluttered in any way, shape, or form. It's really minimalist. You start to see clusters of behavior that way too. So then we can start to focus and think, oh, actually, if we look at the clusters in the visual system, we can see much more how they process things well. When they have the choice about something, how they want it to be. So therefore, when they're in an environment at work or anywhere else, how can we help them create a visual environment that's going to help them flourish rather than exhaust them because it's not a good match with their sensory thumbprint, with a cluster of those sensory things that we've picked up within each of the senses?
I know we've said this many times, whether it's children or adults, that those physical outbursts, let's just try and refine it that way, that they're never okay. It's not okay to lash out and hurt people. But I guess what we're trying to talk about here is the reason why that happens might be more easily solvable than we think if we go away from the physical outburst to the reason behind what might be causing something that ends up as a physical outburst.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really one of the adults that I was working with. It's how we can replace. Yes, we need to look at those outbursts, but also looking at when someone is avoidant because they know that they will not react well to something. And that's very nice and very honoring that they know because it's hard to control yourself when your brain goes into fight, flight, fright. It's we know that it's hard to be there. Adults will take responsibility for that, but withdraw. So it's how one of the adults that I was working with, he realized that actually what we called proprioceptive socialization was what he wanted and the way forward for him, recognizing that he did want to be social. He really wanted to connect with other people, but doing it out at a bar, doing it in a restaurant, doing it with a big group of his workmates wasn't going to happen. He just wasn't going to work out a way to being able to tolerate that and just really did not want to. So we worked out ways that he could connect with them in a way that was going to meet his sensory needs really well. So
Okay.
physical things, going down to the gym, going walking, doing things out in the park, with someone else and just finding someone who was compatible to be able to enjoy that muscle, that physical activity with him. So he had a social contact, but it was about focusing on the sensory needs of him while doing the social rather than exposing him and helping him cope, which we can do. We can try and help them cope in typical social environments, but sometimes it's just like, well, let's find a different way of being social that really helps you and works with you.
Which is where we have Laure Jackson to help you, which is important because you recognize things that we wouldn't.
Mm.
Um, we can, the classic one, I always come back to this because it's such an easy one that most of us will understand. But you're in a supermarket, there's a child kicking and screaming on the floor. That's bad behavior. End of story. It's not okay for the child to be doing that. However, the reason why they're doing that might be poor discipline at home. They want something the parents indulge them, never necessarily a healthy thing. But the outcome is still the violent kicking on the floor. But it also could be there's too much noise. They can't cope with the smell of the bread. It's overwhelming their senses and they're reacting to that. And
Mhm.
it's not about justifying aggression because that's never okay. The physical stuff when you're hurting people, that's not okay. But actually, it's the reason behind it. Is it just selfish, nasty? I want this. I'm going to have a strop. That's bad. That's naughty. But actually, is it for something else? I remember at school, one of the teachers said, you can't use the word naughty or bad to a child. Why is that? Because that's negative. Bad behavior is negative. Why
Mm.
would you want to affirm something bad? And we need those definitions and terms and the clarity of what something is, but it's the reason behind it, which is important. I knew a guy who had a massive raging fever in a hospital. And his wife spent the whole time apologizing to the consultant guy. This was a lovely, lovely, gentle man with a fever raging in his head. I don't know, 105 or something degrees, very hot. He was the most racist person you've ever met. He isn't, he never was. But with a fever, it completely transformed his was. So his wife spent the whole time saying to the doctor, I'm so sorry. He's never like this. Don't worry, he said. He's got a fever. His brain is literally on fire. We're not offended by what he's doing because there's a physical reason why he's behaving like this, and he's not himself, and we know that. So we're not bothered. We're not offended by the racism going on here because he's not actually being racist. His brain is melting, literally. It's on fire, literally. So we need to cool that down, and that will change the behavior. It doesn't make it okay. And when his wife told him, he was gutted and profusely apologized. But we can't necessarily help certain things, but there are certain things we can, and that's where you come in.
Yeah, so I mean, those they're absolutely key, and we can so often use those sensory strategies, even if something actually has a different route. So, because sensory is so powerful, we can use those strategies to help bring regulation and order, not bring a fever down. That is physical, but there are so many other things that you just think actually using the senses, because again, we bypass the brain, we bypass the thinking brain when you use sensory strategies. So all the time when we're trying to reason with people, or we're trying to set boundaries, or we're trying to do the typical traditional methods, that they are not going to work because the brain is on fire. Yeah, absolutely, such a brilliant description. There was a physical fire because of a fever, but it's the same thing when your brain just goes into extreme overwhelm, and whether it be like, which is kind of different to a tantrum, but actually there are also adult tantrums, and they are for a behavioral reason, and you need to deal with them differently as you would to an extreme overwhelm, whether you call that a meltdown or an overwhelm for a child or an adult. You've got tantrums for children and adults, and you've got meltdowns and extreme overwhelm for children and adults, and both will have a different route. But thankfully, sensory actually can help them both.
The reason why I brought up the physical condition of someone with a severe fever is we can, I suppose, more easily and more readily accept, okay, well, it's not his fault. He's reacting in a very aggressive manner. However, we understand he's got a fever. The doctor understands that. Therefore, physical condition equals physical outcome. The problem, I guess, which is why I love doing these shows, I know you do too, is saying, that's a physical condition resulting in a physical outcome. But there can be a sensory issue, which may not be quite so obviously physical, resulting in a physical outcome. It actually can be the same, not necessarily fever. That is physical. However, there are sensory things that can lead there.
Yeah, yeah. And I love the fact that it is for all ages, and we need to look at it for all ages. That's the strong push that's going on with me at the minute, just really trying to help people see at every single stage in life, there is something that if we can at least help ourselves from a sensory perspective, life will be a bit easier with everything else that we keep with, that we deal with and cope with.
We are continuing our series on sensory healthy stuff, but that was a really good nearly 20 minutes of conversation, which just randomly happens, which is great. I wanted to touch on a sensory healthy area because your other part on a Tuesday, which is Dr. Richard Scott, has recently retired. So I was thinking about sensory healthy retirement.
Oh,
As a topic. I mean, that's the bit that I can
yes.
comprehend is you're going full bore in a job, you might wind down slowly and then you stopped.
Ah.
And then there's going to be a sensory healthy change and modifying stuff going on. So there you are.
Oh,
Sensory
okay.
healthy
Well,
retirement.
okay, let me go. Because ironically, what has come to mind was the difference with being with a little 1-year-old yesterday. We were here, I was just, we were here playing in our center, in my center here. And she's just a delight. And there was a calmness, and she was following instruction, just doing her own little thing. And the mum has just been with her all the time. It has just been them in their environment. She hasn't gone out. I'm not criticizing anything that happens here, but I'm just putting it into context. There was no other nanny. There were no nurseries. There was no anything else. The mum had a lovely understanding of the little one, and the little one has been in an environment that the mum has been able to adapt to all the time, and her behavior is gorgeous. Just absolutely lovely. And that calm, content, coordinated and confident little girl, which is how I class sensory health, those four C's. This was just her. And I was wondering, just reflecting last night on the difference between being in an environment where you can choose, because the mum is a stay-at-home mum. So that's an environment that that family can choose. And therefore, when you come to retirement, you are also completely reframing everything. So now you have that choice to step back and start regulating everything that is in your life because you don't have to get up at a certain time. So therefore, how do you choose to wake up? Do you set something that will stimulate your auditory system? Do you actually want an alarm? Or do you want to wake up naturally with the sunlight? So use your visual system to wake up. How much energy do you want to be expending during the day doing things that you don't want to do, and therefore how much downtime do you need? How much exercise do you need to feel well? How much of slow calming music do you need at the end of the day? Well, actually, if you've been in control of your sensory environment throughout the day, then you might find that you need a lot less of this in the evening because actually you have found a really lovely state to be in. And you can do that 24/7 because depending on what else you choose to do with your life, you have very little other pressure in the same way that either being a parent or being in work will do for you.
It got me thinking really because the bits I can imagine are I remember we went through a time as a family when there was so much stress. We'd lost jobs, there were floods in the house, and there was just relentless pressure. And I remember we got to the end of that, and the flood had been fixed, the floor was sorted, we had a new job, we moved house, everything had become calmer again. There were moments of agitation which we couldn't quite understand. And what we realized was we're not now under stress and duress because obviously moving house in itself has its own
Mm,
issues. And as we started to calm back off that, we realized that all the stress that had been in the previous home had gone. And then there was an agitation that we are all struggling with that kind of felt like frustration, agitation, boredom. And we recognized after a little bit of time, we haven't got stress. And the lack of stress is actually causing stress, which is weird to speak out loud. But
mm,
I would imagine that is probably the only thing I can kind of comprehend with someone coming to retirement in any sort of a job, whether it's an office, driving a truck, I don't know, in a hospital as a nurse or whatever you might be doing. But when you come to the end of that, there's a stress from the lack of stress.
mhm, mhm. And also I think within that becomes then how much of purpose fits into the stress. Because it's not just the fact that you don't have to be on top of something, which causes that extra stress or on top of more things than you would actually want to be. But it's about what are you actually investing your time? What are the things that you're actually choosing to do with that? So there are so many areas that feed into one another to help someone be well. But definitely retirement has to be planned on so many different levels. And I think having that dissection of their sensory processing needs within that can really help people flourish into retirement rather than kind of feel very uncertain, unsettled about what the future holds and where they're going.
I guess, I mean, I'm not old enough for retirement, just saying. But I guess one of the issues is going to be if, and this, I remember there's someone talking about it, that there was this nurse, she'd been a nurse for 40 years, whatever, retired. And every time they met as a group, as part of a church on a Wednesday evening or whenever it was, the nurse says, right, I need to be home by 9. And they're all saying, what, we're just about arriving. Yes, but I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Why? Well, I did for 40 years. Great, but you don't have to. And actually, it wasn't just a bit of a, oh, we can try and accommodate this. It was actually quite a severe issue because everyone's saying, we don't even get home from work till 7, 8. If we're here for this couple of hours together, then at 9 o'clock, and you wanted to go home, how that's never going to work. And it caused a lot of angst. And I don't know whether she stayed or not, but in the end, I'm looking in from outside, nothing to do with
Mm,
me, but I'm
mm,
thinking, yeah, I'm sorry, but she needs to adapt to the situation she's in because she hasn't got to do that. And she's trying to tell 15, 20 other people, yep, do it my way. Well, actually, no, there is an idea of the greater good. We need to be careful with that. Otherwise, it's utilitarianism, which is bad ultimately. But actually, don't get up at 4, get up at 6, and
yeah.
then you can actually partake in normal stuff with life.
Yeah, yeah. And it's how we learn to negotiate and to work with others over those things. It's that's the delicacy of caring for someone to help them through that transition. Because as she says, and that there are certain things that are well ingrained over a lifetime of working, and it's how we help people. Mm.
Because I mean, again, the occupational therapy part of what it is that you train to do, and obviously you're using that now, specializing in sensory health. But it's about getting people to engage in life, either in the workplace or in a school or just in life generally. But that lady was really, really no. I get up at 4. That's the end of it. Tough. Accept it. And the problem is that nobody else is going to accept it because they're not getting up at 4, and they don't need to, and they couldn't actually because they're starting work at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And there is an element of how do we continue to engage in society. And I think about Dr. Richard Scott, your Tuesday co-part, and he's retired, and he very wisely, his wife did this earlier in the year, but he's taking time, deliberately not doing stuff, to think, okay, well, I've worked for this long as a GP, 40 years, 30 years. Now I need to take a pause and a stop, not because it's good to pause and stop, but if I don't stop and pause and just reflect a little bit, I'm going to end up diving into stuff while I can. And maybe that's okay. But retirement for me is not about doing nothing, it's about doing something different.
Mm.
But if we don't take time to work out what we might want to do, we'll end up diving into stuff that perhaps isn't the best thing for us to do for the rest of our working able life. Because 65, we don't just stop having functional roles.
No, no, absolutely. And also it's similar. Interesting timings. I'm going through that season change as well, when my last one leaves home in a couple of weeks. So it's like I am moving out of being mum orientated with family as number one to then flipping to saying, actually, I have a lot more time and energy and focus that I can apply. And at the moment, it is mainly going into this, because obviously this is what I absolutely love to do. But there are also other things that I think are going to be really important for me to do. And yeah, we all, whatever life stage we're in, let's stop and pause and have a chance to reflect. And yeah, I'm going to be feeding into my senses in a fuller way.
Now, I chatted with this with Richard, chatted it out, but he had a lovely way of talking about retirement in terms of cars. So rather than retire when we think, okay, that's the end of it, now my functional role is finished, which is a very depressing, terribly negative way, he saw it as having retires, TYRE, new tires. I'm now retired for the next part of my life, not to stop and do nothing, but to stop and do something new.
That's a brilliant. I love that phrase. Yeah, retired. I think we all need to write that somewhere.
Yes. TYRE, if you're a bit curious about that one, TYRE is the British tyre, okay? Tyre is when you get tired out, TIRE, but TYRE, retired. I thought that was great. Getting a fresh set of rubber on the car for whatever's. I love that analogy.
And for what it does for your head to think, because otherwise it's retirement. You go and like, what do you do? You go and, I don't know, sit and have a cup of tea, or you read your paper, which I mean,
That's
I'm
fine.
not denying those things. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. But it's more like, you just don't like just sit there in a corner anymore. It's like, right, okay, new wheels, new adventures. What is it going to be? What is it going to look like?
Yeah, and which is great, and I'm enjoying learning about retirement through Richard, who we chat with every week, to see how he has done it. His wife went through the same process. I think it was just after Christmas 24-25. So she's a little bit ahead of him. He retired this summer, but it was interesting just how his approach I thought was really healthy, because it's not right, I'm going to do nothing and play golf, which might be fine. But there's more to life than just doing that, and it's not about never doing anything you did. It might be that you use some of that skill, but I think what you're talking about is with your youngest child now moving away. I say child, isn't adult now, isn't he? But with him moving away, actually, it does change your time, and it doesn't mean it's great. I don't have to worry about my children anymore. Never going to not happen. They're your children, of course. You're going to be concerned for them, but now you can think about what else you can do instead of just being a mum, which I'm saying carefully, but I'm not just a mum. Now I'm still a mum, but actually there's other things I can do with my time and energy. And it's a really good, healthy approach to look ahead. Well, what might God be calling me to do instead of just carrying on as I was doing?
Mm-hmm. I love these moments of pause. Once we've deposited him at university, I'm going to take an extra couple of days at the end of it to just, I mean, I don't have the luxury of weeks or months, which would be nice to have a sabbatical, but just take some time out. 2 days is what I'm thinking. Stop, think, pause, reflect, pray, go for a sauna. Those things are going to be important to, reflect.
You see, Richard's retiring from being a general practitioner. That's what he's retired from, and who knows where he's going to go. I love the fact he wants to keep on doing chats like this on medicine on a Tuesday, and he's working in a magazine as well. But I'm loving where he's going. But I love the fact that, in a sense, you are about to retire from being for the want of a better phrase, a full-time mother. You don't stop being a mother, and he doesn't suddenly lose his ability to do CPR on someone who's dying in front of him. No, not my problem anymore. He's not going to be doing that, but he's not going to be actively seeking it out, and you're not going to be actively seeking out being a mum because there's no one to be a mum to as it was. The mum bit doesn't finish. It just changes and adapts and evolves into something new.
Yeah. It's just the sense of not being responsible for the first time in 25 years. It's like, right, boys have brought you up, it's kind of like something happens. I'm here if you want to talk to me. And obviously I'll do everything and would absolutely love being with them again. But I know that it's not my responsibility. If something happens, it's like they'll work it out. That's what they're supposed to do. They're adults now.
Well, that's what we want them to be able to do. Otherwise, what was the point in the parenting and the late nights and the early nights and the no sleeps and the hospital runs and all the things that make up being parents? It doesn't end. You're not suddenly stopping being a parent, but you're now parenting differently. And it's not like when you retire, that's it, you're useless to society, which always, I think that's a really sad way of looking at it. Now you're useful to society, which is a horrible way of wording it, but it's a different usefulness. It's a different thing that you can do, and exploring that and thinking, well, now I don't have to get up at 4:00 on an alarm, and I haven't got to charge to work by 7:00, and I can't do. Now, like you say, you can choose where you go and when you go there, and probably become a grandparent is the usual thing. Much more of a grandparent on duties, but it's exciting if you want it to be.
Let's embrace life.
Let's embrace life and living. Absolutely. There you are. Sensory health or retirement. What's the best thing that someone can do? Right, I'm retiring next year. How do you best prepare? Do you wait until the last minute, handbrake turn into retirement and fall out, or do you do better when you prepare sensibly?
Absolutely. And especially if you haven't taken stock of what your senses do, then take some time to look at your life between now and say 6 months before, or a couple of months before the actual retirement date, and pay attention. It's just absolutely be conscious of the things that you do that feed into your senses. Check the levels of the sights, the sounds, the smells, the materials that you like, the things that you like to relax into, whether you've got like soft blankets that you like to cuddle up with, to have your morning coffee and read your paper or your magazine or check your social media or whatever. Have a look at the sensory environments of everything. And pay attention to it and think, actually, I'm going to light a few more candles, or I'm going to get some smelly stuff for the house, actually, or actually, I'm going to go to the gym for a couple of hours every day because that is going to make me feel so good. Or I'm going to get a dog because actually walking a dog, having the petting, having that tactile input, those are the kind of things that I would really like. So within all the planning that you will do for your mental capacity and for your physical health, take stock of your sensory health as well and go through the 7/8 senses and have a look at what you enjoy, what you avoid, what you like, and how much of a sensory experience do you want, a sensory healthy retirement.
Which is possible if you look at it from a positive point of view. How can I best appreciate and enjoy and make the most of this, as opposed to I'm now useless in society, which is absolutely not true, by the way. You are beautifully, deliberately made on purpose, with purpose by God, all of your life, not just of the most useful working bit, as people might see it. And thank you. If you want to connect with Laure Jackson in any way and make use of her services, which she can help you with your sensory health, your children, your wife, your husband, your grandparents, perhaps, you can contact her. The best way is pure247radio.org, pure247radio.org/ALJ. For Laure Jackson. Thank you, Anne.
Right. See you next time.
Pure Media, the magazine, comes out on the first Friday every month. And next edition comes out for September on the 5th of September and will be crammed full of amazing writers, features and columns. If that's not enough, we'll be delving deeper into the life and times of Jennifer Benson from US-based Ignescent. And if you love Lego, we'll be chatting with a man who gets to play with Lego every day. That'll be Josh from Go Chatter Studios. The digital version is always freely available online, and you can enjoy a printed subscription and get a copy in your hands too. Just head over to www.puremediathemagazine.com, where we're always on point and always in print.